The theme of this talk, can everybody see my screen just before I continue?
Yep.
Yeah, okay, excellent. Yeah, so the theme of this talk is using voice and AR user experience to transfer knowledge in an aging industry, and I'll kind of get into what that means throughout the presentation. Katie, thanks for the introduction. Yeah, I'm the creative director as well as a senior UX designer at Neuron. We're a San Francisco-based user experience and product design agency. We kind of work across various disciplines and verticals, from enterprise software to consumer-facing mobile applications, as well as marketing websites and more storytelling exercises. So we really kind of run the gamut there. We tend to focus on UX, not just from a production standpoint, but how it ties into business strategy and overall goals and KPIs. So I have a case study that I'd like to present to you today that I think is interesting. It's not a full AR or VR experience, but it does kind of tie in a lot of various disciplines within user experience for a kind of a custom solution in a niche industry. So I'm going to kind of walk through the project goals and approach that we took, some of our design considerations, the two solutions and use cases that we have for now, and then a little bit about localizing it for another market outside of the US. So to get into the goals and approach, essentially this was a suite of products that gives industrial workers superpowers. So what that means is, you probably know that in today's day and age, workers that are kind of working in the field, skilled tradesmen, industrial factory workers, they're getting older and they're starting to retire from their industries, and there's kind of a void in the market right now. It's becoming more attractive for younger people to get into these specific fields. So that could be, you know, from factory work to telecommunications to anything that's operating in the field or in a factory industrial setting. So these companies are trying to prevent a loss of this tacit knowledge as a lot of their senior practitioners start to retire. 50 to 70% of them are baby boomers, and they're planning to retire relatively soon or have already done so. Also trying to decrease downtime costs of their workers. So giving them access to more information when they need it. What are the kinds of things that we can provide to them in context so that they can more efficiently accomplish their tasks and overall goals. So there's sort of two players in this scenario. There are mentors and there are workers. So for mentors, it's a way for them to give back to their industry and sort of pass the torch and provide that tacit knowledge to these younger practitioners. And also a way for them to continue to work remotely, as opposed to being in the field, as you know, their bodies might not be able to withstand the demands of these kinds of high stress jobs. And for workers, the opportunity is to receive tactical information on site. So as opposed to having all that knowledge in advance, there's the ability for them to pull up some of the resources they need in real time. And also just to accomplish these tasks more effectively in high stress environments. So there's a lot of considerations around how to do that. And one of those is to interface completely hands-free. So, you know, introducing technology into these kinds of situations, you can't have people tapping on buttons and iPads and things like they do today. We really need to rethink how this works as far as the sort of emergence of these voice interfaces. So for workers, the solution or the device that we're embedding this UI into is a wearable headset. This isn't a proprietary product of the company we were working with, but they did, you know, have some involvement in its development. So essentially, as you can see from the photo here, there's this headset device, and there's a small screen with a focal point of a few inches in front of their right eye typically. So this allows them to sort of work, have their typical field of vision, but also have this screen available that is controlled completely by voice. And they also have a camera to sort of record things that they're seeing in real time. And on the mentor side, they could log in from a variety of different devices. So they can use an iPad, they can use their desktop as well as a phone. So it's much more flexible on their end. So to get into kind of the design considerations around this relationship, the UX challenges were making a UI and an interaction model that was tactical, informative, and purposeful. Reduced a lot of the visual noise that you get in these environments because safety is still a primary concern. Making the navigation very easy to understand because we don't want to make these people have to think in these dangerous, potentially, situations. Also, you know, there would be some adverse reaction to introducing a technology like this. So making that product as simple and easy to use and onboard and everything was of great concern for us. And from an architecture standpoint, making sure it's flexible to accommodate features as they're developed in the future, and to as the information, resources, and libraries that they're able to tap into grows and flexes. And then an obvious navigation and prioritizing the information that they need at the moment that they need it. So some of the considerations around what workers wanted out of this, it was to be able to capture what they're doing so that they could reuse that and store that for future knowledge and other people to learn from. And also to retrieve some of that information in context to help them accomplish their tasks more effectively. Also more insight over their daily workflows. So actually being able to pull up their tasks and things that they need to do and check them off in real time was, you know, definitely a desire. And because at the end of the day, they're just trying to check these things off their lists and call it a day, right? So also easy communication with these mentors to solve problems faster in the field in real time, as opposed to having a problem and then having to go back and communicate with someone at the end of the day, try to understand what's wrong and then come back again. So trying to improve that efficiency. Some of their concerns are with, you know, they think that the system's not going to recognize their commands, or there could be some frustration around mistaken words. Just generally with the target audience here, you know, blue collar workers, they tend to be more reluctant to adapt or to implement these types of technology and kind of try new solutions in this case. And then legibility and contrast, because it could be in quite dark environments. We want to pay close attention to that. For mentors, they want the ability to work off-site and still contribute and give back to their companies. They want to be able to telestrate on the screen using video features to show workers what they need to do as they're doing it. And then they want to be able to tap into different documentation and live data so that they can more easily diagnose the problems in the field and provide solutions. So their concerns are insight, transferring their knowledge, and efficiency and intuitiveness of the system. And this just illustrates a little more about the display. So it does appear quite small when you see it here, but due to the focal point, it actually is fairly large. I don't have the exact specs in front of me, but you know, we'll get into kind of the UI and layout and some of the considerations around that, given its size. So voice was a big part of this from a user experience and interaction model perspective. And some of the things we had to work through were how we label commands, different taxonomies or classifications of commands. Is there specific instructions for how to wake up the system? How do we let people know when it's listening, when it's not listening? And having clear, consistent language so that it's easily understandable. from a visual design standpoint, this is just a quick mood board that kind of illustrates the look and feel that we were after, but we made a conscious decision to go with a mostly dark user interface because a lot of these environments are dark, and providing a bright white screen would create some safety concerns with glare. So this was generally the direction we took. So as far as the solution, I want to play a quick video for you that kind of illustrates this technology in a construction scenario. So the next slide, it'll just be a quick video. Hopefully that wasn't too loud, but I have a sequence of many of these screens, so I can just sort of walk through some of the conscious decisions now that you've seen the video. So when the system first boots up, this is the frame that they would see in the headset. So size of the elements was of importance to us. So you can see a lot of the typography and buttons, everything is sort of oversized as it would be on a normal user interface that you would access on a desktop or a phone, for example. And we're providing the last login user for quick access. And then you can see anything that's written on a button is the verbal command that you would actually say to invoke that. So the names of previous users are there. The names of the current or last logged in user is there as well. And we're providing some context or instruction as it loads, just because depending on the connectivity, it could take some time. So reminding them that they need to say, hey, Tacit, to invoke the microphone, and then say any command on the screen to navigate to that. And then other help affordances, like they can show help at any time or they can go home at any time. So that avoids complexity if they're nested a few levels deep into the system. So the primary interface actually allows the camera feed to flow through it on a dominant portion of the screen. And in these environments, the idea is that every asset, things that they interact with, whether it's a piece of machinery or whether it's an entire apartment that they're constructing on a job site, that would have a QR code associated with it. So the primary affordance here would be to scan that code. And once the asset is recognized, we can pull up all the required information, who the best mentors are to ask about that asset, and provide more context. And then there's also quick commands on the screen for the user's tasks for that day. They're the mentors that they typically go to for advice, and then asset search. And there are other affordances for settings and things like that. In the top left, that's the personified system. So that would actually be flashing if it was listening to you at the time, to kind of provide that visual feedback. So once it gathers that asset information, it pulls it up into this split screen display with some, general location and an image associated with that asset and various data. They can dig deeper into more information, or they can open their tasks and media and other resources associated with that asset. If they open their tasks, as we see here, they can quickly view the priority of those tasks and open them by a numbered system. So as opposed to relying on, like actually saying out document wiring installation progress, we're simply numbering them and having the command open matched with the number to make it quicker and more effective. And the same with marking things off. It would be check 1, check 2, check 3, check 4, etc. If they're adding media, so one of the goals with this was to create a library of tacit knowledge around these assets and workflow processes so that future generations can have that more easily understood. So in this scenario, we're actually using the camera of the headset to record a procedure. So you can see that we're pairing common icons that are more universal with the specific verbal command written out in plain English so that they don't have to memorize some commands ahead of time. And we're sort of tucking them away into the lower portion and the upper portion of the screen so that the majority of it can be visible. Once those assets are, or I guess once the recording is done, it saves it to the asset media. And here again, some of our considerations with the architecture were if we're going to have multiple pages, to pan them from left to right and then stack. It's a top to bottom, left to right organization. And the position of the numbering system never changes, but the assets will. So they would say open 1, open 2, open 3 to get to the asset they want, as opposed to new video 1, for example. And if they go back to home, this is just bringing them back to that default state. So and then there's another case study I'd like to share. It's a similar video, but slightly different functionality that we're showing here. So this is for more of a manufacturing setting. And I'll play that now. So in that last video, we were really trying to highlight the telestration features. So in this case, we're dealing with a robotic arm, which when it opens up here, we have some information. We see that there's tasks associated with that, and we can open up the data that we have on that specific piece of equipment. So here we're kind of highlighting that, how we can show them in real time some data associated with it and, alert them if there is an issue. And from within this asset, they can open up their tasks. And if there is a mentor that they need to speak to about it, they would say open mentors, and then they would see who's available, their specialty, and who's recommended based on the specific asset. So in this case, we're beginning a telestration, or we're beginning a mentor session with Rick Smith in this case. So once we've established connection, this would be the worker's view. So that anytime they could capture their view for Rick, which would essentially grab a still image of what they see at that time, Rick can also do that from his end. So here would be Rick's iPad, and he could capture Sharon's view, grab a still image, and here we have a layering of two different scenes. So on the left, predominantly would be that still image, which he could resize or swipe out of the way. And the video off to the right would actually be the real-time feed of what Sharon was seeing. So once that still image is captured, Rick could type on the screen. He could use the pen tool to actually annotate or highlight specific items. He's also establishing a feed with Sharon so he can speak, and she will actually hear his instruction while he's sort of drawing these things on the screen or giving her real-time advice or instruction. And from Rick's end, he could also go in and get more insight into the performance of that specific asset or resources associated with it, so that he can provide that information back to Sharon. So then we also, as part of this project, we're thinking about the opportunity in the Japanese market. So we did have to sort of reformat the user interface to be able to accommodate those characters, and just ensuring that sizing and things were appropriate for legibility, the overall text lengths that we're establishing for buttons and other assets, which was an interesting process. And here you can kind of see some of those screens. And as part of this, bringing it to the Japanese market, we had the ability to create mascots, which are very common here. So we created 2 mascots for each of the primary users, the worker and the mentor. And that's everything I have for you. So thanks for checking it out.
Thank you so much. That was awesome. This is actually, if anyone joined a little bit later, this is my second time hearing Matt talk about this, but it's still so interesting to me to hear this case study. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Some comments. That was so cool. So I'll open it up to Q&A right now, and I'm just gonna ask any of the questions that are in the chat. And I know I personally have like a lot of questions. I'll try and like keep it
Sure.
to a reasonable amount. Let's see. So one question is there also voice recognition such that the system can confirm the identity of the person logging in?
No, it wasn't. That wasn't something that we considered in this scope. I think as far as the voice, we're using some other off-the-shelf solutions for the voice recognition. And also a consideration here is that this could also be high noise environment too. So we wouldn't want to completely restrict them or have to have their pitch be perfect in order for it to recognize who it was. So we're kind of taking their word for it in these situations, and I guess a slight sacrifice on security or privacy rather. Yeah.
And then we have a question, is this product currently available to the public?
It is not currently, it's still being developed. There are some solutions that provide, I guess, more of an augmented scenario where you can pull up three-dimensional objects and things, but this one was really more on the relationship between the mentor in real time and the worker. And there were even more developments into the types of tools and affordances provided to the mentors to relay that information. But yeah, it's still in process.
Okay. And then what software did you use for the app development and the voice recognition? And what was the mix of the team? If you can answer both those questions.
Yeah, so as far as the software, that's being developed by their internal team, and we're responsible for more of the interaction model and the design and strategy around that. So I can't fully speak to that. But what was the second part of the question again?
And then the second part of the question is, what was the mix of the team that was working on this case?
Sure. So from our side, we were doing the UX, UI, and then they had other stakeholders that did have some background in augmented reality, as well as logistical systems for warehousing and various other industrial settings. They had their own back-end team working on this. They had their own development team and other business associates.
Yeah, so so Neuron is your company is like a consultancy agency kind of?
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm curious to kind of build on that, like how much, like what aspects of this are expected of your team, and like what is, I don't know how to ask my question, but I'm just kind of curious, like what your responsibility is and how that works with teams across like different companies and divisions. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. So, I mean, first of all, we had to understand the relationships of the various users in this case. And there was a desire for this to be multi-platform on the mentor side, but then also having the software that appears on the headset be flexible in that it could go on a variety of different headset devices. So there was some decisions around that it would have to potentially modify its aspect ratio and various proportions accordingly, because they're not all the same sort of 16:9 display. But I think to answer your question, once we understood the devices, the relationship between the users we were solving for, we were just starting to think about these various scenarios in the field and the different considerations that would be required for each, and understanding the size and focal point and range of vision in these scenarios, starting to basically create screens and walk through the various user flows and design components and typography and design elements along the way. Some ideas around animation to stitch these flows together in a way that provided visual feedback to the user. And I think as part of this, it was, working with their development team throughout this process just to understand what was possible and what the constraints were. So, when we needed to like dial it back on the telestration side, they would provide us those inputs. And working with constraints is really important, because from a UX perspective, you can propose lots of crazy, interesting things if you're doing it in a vacuum, and not have to worry about the implications or um, tech time and dev time that it would take to actually create that. So it is a fluid process. We did work through this in more of a waterfall fashion where we delivered a design specification to them and then they started building it, but we did take into consideration their input throughout the design phase.
So it sounds kind of like, you know, the responsibilities and aspects that you focused on kind of developed as the product is developing too, right?
Yeah, we definitely started with common project goals and various use cases that we needed to solve for, and understanding the general business opportunity. But the little things do come up along the way, and we make recommendations for how we can do features a little bit differently than what they're suggesting. And it's we're not simply taking a PRD in most cases and just putting it together. We are kind of helping inform what the end product becomes.
Okay, so another question, how easy is it for workers that English is not their first language? And is that something that you considered at all? Is that from a UX perspective something to consider? Is that more like from the hardware, I guess, of the voice? I don't know how that works, but
Yeah.
how did you consider that?
Yeah. So for the most part, we were trying to, well, we were doing a couple things. We're numbering things and having common commands in front of them because, for most people, they know the general numbers in English, like 1 through however many, and then simple action words like open or sort or back or home, very kind of common English phrases. And I'm just trying to find some other screens. And then always displaying the commands on screen was the most important thing that we came up with, because a lot of the times you can get trained on a specific piece of software. You can know keyboard shortcuts if you're a power user of a desktop software or something. But if you're actually working in the field, we had to keep it dead simple. So, short, common English phrases and displaying it right there on the screen.
Yeah, and that's kind of like also has to do with like UX writing or like microcopy as well, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Oh,
In our case, it had to be much more utilitarian
yeah.
and obvious. But in other scenarios for a marketing website or something, if the tone of voice of that company is more playful or more sarcastic or something, you could see it be less to the point, be a little more loose with the micro copy to kind of fit the persona
Yeah.
of the brand.
Okay, another question. Do you think using GPS would be better for locating the user's location rather than scanning QR codes?
Uh, yes, and there was some talk around that. There's also conversations around beacons and other technologies, but at the end of the day, it's less about tracking the position of the person and tracking their interaction with the assets. So when the assets are tied to a specific location, then once that user logs into it, for example, we're gonna know their location. So it was less to sort of track what the employee was doing, as more so understanding all the moving pieces of their business and the equipment that they're working with. It's a good
Yeah,
question.
it looks like those QR codes like brought up a lot of like really valuable information as well. This case study stood out to me because my dad, my brother, my uncle, they're all building engineers, and so I'm kind of like seeing how this could be super helpful to them based on what I hear. They're like limited technology remotely, the
Yeah.
limited technology that there is for remote. So another question, getting a little bit more personal on this one.
Mhm.
Um, I saw on your link on LinkedIn that your background is in architecture. Can you talk a bit about your transition into UX and AR?
Sure. Yeah, started in architecture, worked for a variety of different firms early on in my career. It's was very interested in this systematized approach to design, found a lot of parallels between, buildings and actually building digital products. I've seen a lot of corollaries in the workflows and, um, you know, putting together a design specification for someone else to build. It definitely translated pretty seamlessly. It was a new sort of design challenge to try to get into, but I would say it was incremental. It's just starting to make connections in the industry. Once when I was in architecture, seeing the potential of working in product design from a bunch of different perspectives. But what I enjoyed about it was that with a building, you can create something, it gets put in place, and then without a very expensive renovation, this project is kind of done. So with product development, you can continue to iterate and kind of make it better based on feedback and inputs and data. And it's in a much shorter time frame too, so you can see kind of your impact a lot faster. So while I still enjoy architecture and reading about it and staying up on the industry, I was definitely happy to make the transition into user experience.
Yeah,
Going off of that,
yeah.
kind of. So at San Jose State, we have like, I think it's an interaction design minor and a human factors master's program, but there's not a ton of like learning resources for students interested in UX and UI design. So I was just wondering how you suggest that we would further our education in this. And I'm sure like in your company, when hiring people, you look at certain things. And I was just wondering what you think of like General Assembly and those other types of like programs.
Yeah, I mean, we are not strict about any sort of educational background. I mean, none of us were formally trained. I mean, none of my partners and I were formally trained, like we didn't go to school for it, for example. And but we definitely feel that there are programs that are better than others, but we don't shy away from, taking people on from General Assembly or these other boot camps. I think it really comes down to the people involved, who your professors are. It can be so hit or miss. We've seen some people have great examples with that kind of education. We've seen other people that maybe weren't as prepared when entering the field as they could have been for a number of reasons. But I think that having good mentors, no matter like where you are, is one of the most important factors. It was for me. My original mentor was actually a professor from General Assembly he had also worked as a director of product for many companies throughout his career. But that was kind of my introduction to him, was through one of his former students. So yeah, I don't think there's any right or wrong program. I think a lot of it comes down to the type of person, whether they're a self-starter, the types of connections that they're able to make through that education, through associations like this, through meetups, through other groups, Facebook, etc. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.
Another question what we had was if you could explain a little bit more about your role as a creative director.
Sure. So we're not a huge company. We're more of a boutique design studio. We do some front end development where we provide the full service, everything from concept all the way to launching something in the App Store or releasing a SaaS product. So for me, it's kind of helping guide that process at all phases. In some cases, our project teams are small, where I'm kind of leading the UX design, as well as kind of managing others who are helping me. So taking more of a lead UX design role on that project. In other cases, I'm not directly involved with it, but I'm kind of providing inputs at various stages to help my team deliver that project. So it's in UX, as an umbrella term, we could be working on a variety of different things that involve a variety of different creative components. We could be doing video, we could be doing animation, we could be doing interaction, we could just be doing a static UI. So I tend to try to wear many hats and just, guide and provide my feedback the best that I can. But that's, yeah, generally my role.
And then one more question in the chat was, what advice would you give for people who are interested in getting into the UX and AR field? And I think you kind of covered that a little bit with Aaron's question, but maybe like if you could speak at all to, I'm not sure if you have a lot more case studies where you've used like AR technology, but maybe if someone is interested in the relationship between those two and really kind of focusing on that, do you have any advice for someone in that position?
Well, for me, I was always interested in, because of my architectural background and my foray into UX, is ways that we can kind of bridge the physical and the digital spaces. And I think, trying to understand a lot of the different facets and practices around it, as opposed to just diving really, really deeply into one specific technology, I think is useful for people starting out, where they can kind of discover what exactly they want to go into. You're just looking for general advice. Could you repeat the question? Sorry, I kind of lost track of what I was saying there.
That's okay. Anthony, did you actually want to come on and ask your question? Maybe you could clarify a little bit more if you're able to. Sorry.
Yeah, actually, you were right. A lot of the questions were answered with Aaron's question. So I'm actually satisfied with the responses.
Okay, cool. Did anyone else have any questions that they wanted to ask on the mic? I do have a couple questions, but I don't want to like take up everybody's hog up all the time.
Yeah, I had one more. I was just wondering if you think that AR and VR is something that we're going to be seeing a lot more in the future when it comes to UX and UI design. And if you have like any, like, I guess, plans on implementing that in like more of your case studies.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, it's something we've talked about internally. We've done a few projects, but we could definitely get into more of it. We haven't seen as much of an interest from our clients. Maybe that's just because of the people that we're already working with, or the people we're getting, that are getting referred to us. But I think that there's going to be a huge demand for it, and we've started to see that through the pandemic, that VR especially could be starting to have its moment. Like at first it was for gaming, and it was very niche, but I think we're starting to see it break out a little bit more into the mainstream. And there are tons of potential AR applications that have yet to be created, and I think that it's definitely on an upward trajectory, and it's a great field for everyone here to be involved with. So we're just trying to continue our education around it to the point where we can really deliver great user experiences. But I think for a lot of UX designers, it's we're starting to become more involved in those conversations, because I think it is still very nascent of an industry, and there aren't exactly, from my perspective, like a ton of norms around what these interfaces are. So it does create a lot of freedom for us as designers to help define what those interfaces look like. And then in voice user experience, I mean, as our reliance on screens is starting to diminish, or, you know, maybe things might be, you know, in the pandemic, nothing is really touch, right? So voice is having a moment as well. I think it's only going to become more present in the future. I don't think we're ever going to reach a point where screens are not required, and doing everything based on voice, but it's definitely starting to grow in the number of home devices that you're seeing, the number of skills that are being built for things like Alexa. I think there's, you know, huge growth potential around it. And as UX designers, I mean, our industry is always changing, so we are also trying to constantly kind of get ahead of that curve and make sure that we have expertise in all of these developing markets and applications. Yeah.
And then I had a question. What did the UX research for this case study look like? And how did, like, do you have someone on your team who's specifically dedicated to UX research, or does the whole team contribute to that? Just kind of what is the process for a case study like this?
Yeah, usually whoever's involved in the project is going to also be handling some of that UX research. We don't have dedicated UX researchers. We just incorporate it into our process. And for a case study like this, we were getting a lot of that information directly from our clients through their interactions so far with their very early MVP product that they had before they came to us. And information from their user interviews and feedback. So, you know, I think as far as this case study is concerned, that wasn't a massive portion of the project. And in a perfect world, it would be. But not all cases were able to actually delve as deep into the research side as we would like to. I think that's just, in general, something I've noticed like across the board when clients come to us, like they want some level of understanding the user needs and based on their business goals as well. But doing very deep user research as a portion of the project hasn't been as common as we would like, I guess.
And then another question just came up. Do you suggest any courses, tutorials, or websites to help us get started on improving our AR/VR design skills? Do you know of any specific recommendations?
Yeah, there's, I mean, there are a few Medium publications that I really like. I think the UX Collective is one of them. I think UX Planet is another one. We also release some articles, but they're usually not geared around AR, VR, but more general project delivery, UX design topics. Yeah, probably wouldn't be the best resource for that, but I think they're definitely out there.
Yeah, definitely. And also to answer that question, I did post up in the UX UI Discord some resources too, if you want to check them out, that were from Medium as well and some other websites. So that's
Awesome.
a place to check it out. And then my last question was, did you also consider the ergonomic design of the physical product, like the headset itself? Was that part of your team's responsibility?
No, so it was intended to be agnostic to that. So there was one specific device that we used as kind of the basis for our screen sizing and design and aspect ratio and, you know, color density and everything. And that was a RealWear headset. It was in some of the images that I showed earlier in the presentation. But the actual ergonomics or industrial design of that was not our scope, and actually wasn't even our client's scope. So they were relying on other products in the industry and just delivering a software solution. That would have been fun though.
Yeah. Are there any other questions? I think we covered a lot.
As far as the basic functionality of the product, such as your voice commands to end the call and such, how do you make sure the call doesn't end because it mishears something they say? And at the same time, if they want to stop the microphone, how do they start the microphone back up if it can't hear them, and so on and so forth? Those little things.
Yeah, we had to create some rules around how the system wakes up. So you would say, "Hey, tacit," and once it understood that, it would start listening. And after you said an additional command, it would actually stay on for a specific period of time. So you didn't have to keep repeating, hey tacit to say anything. If you were doing more of a longer command chain, you could just continue to say what you need. But then as far as kind of fail proofing, ending a call by accident, there wasn't I can't say that was a specific focus of ours, but that's a good thing that you mentioned.
Okay, and as we're kind of transitioning out of the Q&A, did you also host your own meetup, right?
Yes, yeah. So we host a meetup called Beer and UX. Before the pandemic, we were hosting them about once a month in our office in San Francisco. We've since gone virtual, which has actually been nice to be able to get a wider net of people involved in our community, and a number of different speakers who couldn't have been there if we were in person. So you can check us out. You can look us up on Meetup. I'll send a link to Katie and she can share it with you. I think we're about...
linked it.
Oh, you did already? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I also linked your LinkedIn and the Neuron UX website to begin with. If you have anything else you wanted me to share, let me know.
No, that sounds good. Yeah, we're about 1,600 members or so, and I think we have some of the most engaging members of any UX UI groups that I've found or attended on Meetup.